My name is John Witchel. I'm the president and CEO of GitPrime. Thank you very much for coming. Everybody see my mentor on my computer? Darth Vader. Sith Lord, worst project manager ever. Blew up 2 Death Stars. Got nothing for it. So, data-driven approach to leading software engineering teams. I want to start this presentation by asking a basic question, which is it possible to get a 20% increase in productivity with an existing team? That's a big number. I think the answer is yes. And I'm going to spend a little bit of time today trying to show you how we think that happens. So, GitPrime is in the business of productivity metrics for engineering teams for the purpose of creating a more productive engineering team. We've been around for 3.5 years. We have a number of notable clients. Some of those names you should recognize, maybe not all of them. So what is the problem that GitPrime solves? Fundamentally, GitPrime is dealing with a difficult problem, and that is that the black box of engineering. The black box of engineering is an expensive and largely unsolved problem today. And at the heart of that problem is the fact that tracking developers is a surprisingly difficult problem. And it's ironic because developers are the ones that help track virtually every other group in the enterprise today. We're the ones that wrote the software that became Salesforce. We did it for marketing, did it for accounting, did it for inventory. We're the last group to be put under metrics and to be tracked. And I think that's a bad thing. I think that it's very, very difficult to be your best if you're not being measured in some way. And if you're trying to get the most out of your engineering team, we think that the right way to do that is to measure. So, common things that GitPrime can solve for, the kinds of things that we try to measure. And these are questions that we ask our customers. And so ask this of your own team. Which teams on your group in your enterprise made the biggest impact last month? By what metric? I mean, you can ask around. You do surveys. You heard in the previous presentation. Right? Was this week more productive than last week? According to whom and by what metric? I don't know. It kind of sort of felt that way, right? But maybe if we could measure that, that would be a good thing, right? How much of last month's work went to paying down technical debt? Very difficult question to answer today, right? And by a percentage of your total burn of your group. You know, and the last one, how do you show others that your team is working hard? I think we've all been on teams where everybody's busting their ass and you just can't seem to get credit for all the work that you're doing. But if you could put that up on a board and show people outside of engineering, it might change the conversation. So rather than continuing to talk about how, conceptually how we do that, I want to drop right into a series of animations of our product, and I'll talk through it, and I'll talk through sort of how we do what we do and how to use this tool. So let's start with the first one. This is so these are looping animations. So you can just, if you don't quite catch it the first time, just wait about 10 seconds. It'll start looping again. This is our entry point into our product. This is the commit workflow, and what you see here is a consolidated view of all of your repos. And just as a quick note of background, what GitPrime does is we take all the repos in your enterprise, read them all in, parse them, produce a huge set of metadata, and then produce reports on these. Git is the primary source of all of our information. And so what you see here on the upper left are teams, all the different repos, on, off. You can do by period, date ranges, and what we see here is essentially a rough cut of how big each individual commit is by these team members. Now, I think that everybody in this room would agree that counting lines of code is a terrible idea. Anybody want to come up and argue that? Okay. But in context, by somebody who knows how to read this report, seeing how big and how regular the commits are can be a good indicator of whether somebody is succeeding or struggling or needs a little help or most commonly should be left alone. So if we look at Alan up at the top, what we see here is, not Jared, Alan is a person who's lightly committing. Compared to his other two teammates, he looks like he's a problem. He's actually not a problem. He's working on a very difficult engineering problem. He's tuning some SQL. I don't really expect more than 1 or 2 commits over a couple of weeks, given the difficult nature of his problem. Nathan here, checking in, tons of stuff. He's doing a early stage part of the project. Peter down here, tons and tons of merges. When I get rid of all of his merges, he's still in pretty good shape. And by using a simple little search feature up here, I can check whether or not the people who are supposed to be doing work on my ticket are actually doing work on my ticket without interrupting them. And that's this very special thing, because I think we all know that an interrupted engineer is an engineer who is dropped to almost zero productivity. How many times have we all sat there? I've got 15 variables in my head, and then somebody goes, "Hey man, can I just get a second of your time?" You're like, actually, you can have 20 minutes now, because I've totally forgotten what I was thinking about. If we can stop that interrupt behavior around statuses, we pick up productivity. If we know to step in when somebody's struggling, we pick up productivity. GitPrime has a whole set of metrics, some of which will feel familiar to you, some of which are new, and we can rank order people by various data points, and most importantly, we can mark where you are relative to your rolling average or your typical. So let's take this column right here. This is churn. Now, everybody churns. Churning is when you write a line of code and then you rewrite a line of code. Now, we set a line in the stand that basically says if you churn code, if you write a line of code and rewrite that same line of code within 3 weeks, that's fine. You just don't get double credit for it. And if you churn too hard, it may be an indication that there's a problem. So if you look at Catherine at the top of the churn pile, that's terrible. 90% of her code she rewrote in the last 3 weeks. That's very problematic, except for the fact that she's in prototyping, in which case that's totally normal behavior. So I can look, and although she's normally at 38%, give or take, I also know she was just put on that project 2 weeks ago, so I'm actually going to ignore that data set. Luke here, however, he's gotten the number 2, for those of you in the back. He's actually got a problem. He's churned 60% of his code in the last 7 days. He's normally down at low single digits, and I know what he's working on. He's working on a standard admin feature. He's just rewriting some pages. Why is he doing that? I don't know. But as a manager, I need to sit up out of my chair. I'm going to leave Catherine alone. I'm going to leave Mark alone. I'm going to leave Alexander alone. And I'm just going to go check in with Luke. That kind of precision management increases the productivity of everybody else on this board and potentially is going to save Luke from a pretty serious problem. And in this particular case, it was a serious problem, and because I'm a fantastic manager, problem solved. Days since last non-trivial check-in. It's okay to not check in every day, but you can't do it too often. And if you get more than about a week, you need to have a reason why you didn't check in. And there's often a good reason, but not always. At the end of the day, GitPrime is a signaling tool. It's a signal to a manager of where to put your attention. TT100. Time in hours required to write 100 lines of code after churn. Okay? Not a very interesting statistic as a point in time, taken over a long period of time for certain engineers in a certain class of work, that ends up being an outstanding indicator of productivity. Right? For people who are doing largely new features, people who are working in fast-moving parts of the code, front end, HTMLers, this ends up being an excellent area to signal that somebody's gotten stuck. Now, again, I can ignore some of these guys because I know they're doing tuning or they're doing some area where I wouldn't expect a tremendous amount of output. But if I told you that John C. down here at the bottom of the pile is an HTMLer who only writes new features on prototyping, I'm not saying John C. has a problem, but I'd go check. Make sense? Yeah? It's a whole lot better than walking around an office and going, hey man, how's it going? Oh, good, good, oh, okay, cool. Hey man, how's it going? Really? Oh, good, good. Nobody ever admits to it not going good. If you ask any engineer in the middle of their day, how's it going? They will always say good. And you have to probe and you have to push, and that whole time that you're pushing and nudging and asking and trying to uncover problems, you're wasting his time or her time. You're taking productivity away from your team. This aims to solve that. When you get down into the weeds, while we can do some very interesting reporting around teams, sometimes it pays to actually take a look at where the engineer is in position to the rest of the team. And so what we have here is two axes on the upper right. Throughput, which is a function of your aggregate code, how much code you're putting down, net of churn. And from the left and the right, high churn, generally undesirable, low churn, good. So on the upper right-hand quadrant, you have prolific programmers. These are people who output a tremendous amount of work with very little rewrite. On the bottom, you have people who churn everything and have a net output of very little. Usually problematic. Sometimes you can visit that quadrant. Don't stay there very long. On the lower right-hand corner, very commonly you see managers, sort of half-time team leads, people who aren't necessarily supposed to be doing high throughput, lots of work. But what they do tends to be little bits of work that are touch-up, and they're generally, very small in precision in nature. Or more commonly, they're perfectionists, right? And then in the upper left, you have the explorer quadrant. These are people who are churning a ton, and they're putting a ton of work out. You see this most commonly in developers. Who are writing HTML, CSS, front-end JavaScript, where they'll write some code, they'll show it to an internal stakeholder, write some more code, show it to the stakeholder again. Very common pattern, and it's okay to be in that quadrant if that's the work that you're doing. Make sense? You put all that together, and you get trends, right? In this case, I'm showing impact, work volume, impact. Impact is a measurement of essentially the cognitive load of your code. It is a function of how much code you're laying down across how many files spread across the file itself. If you think about that for a second, generally if I was just going to go in and touch up a method, maybe fix a helper method, and maybe tie that out to some front-end piece, all my code would be fairly concentrated across the entire file base, right? But if all of a sudden a guy comes in and I've touched 15 files all over the map, I've got a couple lines of code up at lines 1 through 20, and then I've got edits down at line 300, right? There's a fairly high load there, right? Commit volume, same, is exactly what it sounds like. It's a more sophisticated method of measuring raw output of the team, and we can look at trend lines. One of the things that's very, very common is because we can drop in events onto our reports. We can drop in events on our reports. We can see things that are driving productivity. Normally that's a release, right? Could also be Burning Man. Could also be the loss of a key player on the team, resignation, or the joining of a key player on the team. And it becomes very easy to see what's making a difference on your team. We measure and look at commits. This is a report showing items out for review. Right? This is an extremely helpful data point or report for people that are trying to see that last mile get through the door. Right? Samantha opened up a PR 5 months ago. It's still out. I don't know what's going on there, but let's either kill the PR, let's just take it off, close it out, get rid of Samantha. I don't know. But it's not okay for a PR to be out for 5 months, period, full stop. And of course, this is rank ordered. You can scroll down and you would see the oldest ones. And you also get a sense of, on the upper right, how hard and fast this release is coming in. 81,000 lines of code for review. I don't know who made this slide. It's sort of a worst case scenario. But if you have 81,000 lines of code out for review and you're a week out from lockdown, you can bet that that release is going to go badly. Like, I don't actually have to wait for it to go badly. It's going to go badly, right? 32 open PRs, that's a lot, right? You should be closing out PRs on a big team, on a team of 50 people. You should be closing out PRs a couple days at the absolute outside, right? Makes sense? All of a sudden, the conversation of how's it going and does it feel good starts to change, and it starts being about data. And while most engineers look at these reports for the first time and it's a little bit intimidating and it's a little bit scary that all of a sudden somebody's taking a close look at your data, the most important thing to remember, certainly I think about all the time, is for engineering, data is our friend. Data is where the truth is. When we get in arguments publicly and in our organizations, and we're debating, if it's about the data, more often than not, we win, right? Because data depoliticizes conversations, and it stops being about what we feel and what product managers and stakeholders and managers and suits, and they're very good at talking. And if you can just get out of the talking part of it and get into the data part of it, the truth usually comes out. And so while sometimes finding out that you have a bunch of people looking at your commits and your PRs and your workflows and your impact is a little bit intimidating, once you get used to that, it's actually a good thing for engineering. Our code, or our tool, also looks at commenting. One of the things I love about GitHub and what a lot of our research shows, when you really get into why people love GitHub, it's a very good platform for social coding. It's just a better tool for communicating with other engineers very quickly, getting feedback, looping that feedback in, getting peer review. And that is, again, intrinsically good. It's a good thing, but it's important to understand the flow of commits. If one person on a large team carries the unnatural load of commit review and commenting, that's a sign of low productivity, right? It means that's usually the alpha dog of the team. But if we could spread out his peer review and his commenting out to more engineers, those engineers get better, and that alpha dog can do more of the heavy lifting that he was she was probably originally hired to do. And so what you see here is PR was opened by, commented on by, merged by, right? Shows you who's doing the social work around the release. Again, you see a number of high-level metrics, very, very good for early signaling, very good for indicating that there's a problem before that problem is fully manifest. So that is all of the slides that I brought for the currently shipping product. I brought a couple of slides for our product that's about to ship. Or I can just quit 9 minutes early and we can all go get coffee. You want to see the slides? More? Yes? Okay. So this is my favorite one. We spent this entire time talking about inside the black box, but it's really, really hard to talk about what's inside the black box if you don't also acknowledge that a huge function of productivity around the black box is the inputs. Garbage in, garbage out, cliche, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So we've developed this new idea, which is the first time I'm talking about it publicly, called ticket jitter. Okay? So ticket jitter, what is that? In a perfect world, when a ticket is marked to start implementation, that's the last time anybody should post up anything on that ticket except for work done, check in, close out, go to production. Now in practice, of course, that doesn't actually happen. There's always a small amount of communication on every non-trivial ticket, point of clarification, should it be blue, should it be bright blue, do you want it this way, do you want it that way, right? But if there's too much of that noise post-begin implementation, it is a strong signal that that ticket is screwed the pooch, right? So what we measure, so what ticket jitter is the amount of commenting and edits on a ticket from the time the ticket is marked begin implementation to the end. And to be a little cynical about it, we often see that project managers and product managers, if they have a small, simple clarifying question, will usually just go and do it verbally. But they'll more often than not take the time to comment when they're doing CYA. This brings that up. It surfaces that reality that we all live with. And so if I see that the #1 person who creates the most ticket jitter is Erica, and Sanjay is the engineer who's getting hammered by that ticket jitter, I'm pretty sure that his release is going to go badly, and it's probably Erica's fault. And so let's just get in there and talk about it. Let's go in and see why that's happening. Why is that happening? Did the original requirements get poorly written? Did the CEO come in and change everything? But we can't hold Sanjay responsible for a difficult ticket if 30% of that ticket changed from the time he started working on it to the time he finished it. We think that this is going to be a compelling report that will change the conversation between product and engineering, because it now begins to measure the inputs. I got a couple more. Streak, this is just a good-looking report. God, I love this report. When you manage large groups of engineers, you have 100 engineers or more, right? These are big teams. You tend to manage them by large directional changes. And one of the most common directional changes is, I need you to commit every day. One of the things that we get asked a lot as we're onboarding customers is, well, if you've instrumented all of this, isn't it easy to game the system? Can't I game all your reports? The answer to that question is yes, you can, absolutely. In fact, we wrote a whole blog post about exactly how to game it. And the way that you game it is you write small, regular commits that get reviewed and approved and go to production and don't get rewritten. If you do that, you will get high marks on our system, and so you should. Streaks are a way to measure people's progress towards that. In this case, Remit, right, has a running best score of, what are we measuring on this one? Record streak. This is active commits. Yeah, it's daily commits. I can't see where it is. This is active commits, right? And so if we want people committing every single day, this is a great report to show them how to do that. This one is one of my new favorites. We call it Deliverable Aging. How long does it take, on average, to get a pull request out the door? It's like an AR aging report on a financial system, which may not mean a whole lot to engineers, but it means a whole lot to people in finance. And so what this report is showing is that 5% of all of our commits are getting done, PRs are getting done in 24 hours. 22% are getting done 1 to 3 days. and this big dotted line is the 50% mark. So if all your PRs are getting done somewhere inside a week, it's probably no big deal. But some of this stuff out here is pretty problematic. And if these bars get too big, you probably want to start taking that pretty seriously. This is, again, a great way to measure productivity as a team as the whole before there's a serious problem. And you can see it coming as you move through the buckets and those bars rise. And this is my last slide. And this is feature costing. So feature costing has been around pretty much as long as software's been around. Right? And there's actually whole books written on how to price and estimate the cost of a feature or a piece of software going back to the 60s. Some people hopefully around here have read The Mythical Man Month. That book was written in 1975. Right? And feature costing is very, very precise and a very effective way to do things as long as you're willing to put your engineers on a timer and make them record their time. And we think, as I think most of the industry does today, that's a terrible idea unless you're billing for time and you're in a consulting business. But in terms of general high throughput productivity, it's too much overhead. But you still want to figure out how to cost features. I used to work for a company that had a CEO that every single week he would come in with a brand new breakthrough idea that was going to game change everything, and you need to drop what you were doing, do the thing that he wanted you to do. We called it the imperial feature. And you actually, all the engineers knew about the imperial feature because on the ticket title, we put a period at the end of all imperial features, which meant when you got to lockdown, no matter what happened, don't let that feature drop off the release, even if you had to kill everything else. So now, when that guy produces an imperial feature and it's an absolute game changer, we can come in and show that that was a $50,000 feature. Because we looked at all your commits, all the lines of code, all the churn, all the rework, bundled it all up, took the total amount of cost it cost to run the whole engineering team, and get a pretty good cut at what that feature cost. And we can show how much it cost to support that feature downstream. This is the first of our features that will go outside of Git itself and also start looking at ticket data. I guess a couple of the others will too, but this is the big one. Where we'll now start looking at GitHub or Git data and ticket data. So I would conclude that there's a lot there. Right? Some of it's a little intimidating, but it's better. It's a level up from interrupting every single engineer a couple of times a week. It's a level up from retrospective surveys. It's a level up from not knowing. It's a level up from having to argue and debate and negotiate the value of your work with somebody who is, by definition, a better arguer, negotiator than you are. And that at the end of the day, I just want to be recognized for the quality and strength of my work. And the more I can clearly show that and articulate that and evidence that, the better and healthier I will be as an engineer, and the better my team will be as a whole. And hopefully, as GitPrime continues to grow and be successful, we'll all be better for it. Thank you.